Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into the parent's guide to teaching values to kids. And this is something I think, a lot of our listeners are thinking about. So we're going to break down how to instill those positive moral values.
It's funny. What I found so interesting about this guide is it doesn't just talk about raising, quote unquote, good kids.
Yeah.
It really links morality directly to their success in life.
Yeah.
And I think we often think about that as separate, from things like school or friends.
Right.
But the guide really argues that it's fundamental to all of that.
Yeah, it's like having that strong moral compass kind of gives them the tools to navigate everything else.
Exactly. And,
Yeah.
they use this great analogy in the guide of like a child's mind as a sponge, especially in those early years.
Oh, yeah.
They're absorbing everything around them, not just what we're consciously trying to, instill in them.
That's both amazing and a little terrifying, right?
Totally.
Because you realize how important those early role models are.
Absolutely. And they actually call parents superheroes.
Okay.
And not because we have to be perfect, but because even small actions
Right.
speak volumes. Like, think about a time that you maybe messed up and apologized in front of a child.
Oh, constantly. Are you kidding? I mean, like, I've been busted trying to sneak a cookie before dinner, and my kid's like, Mom, really? Come on.
Right. But see, and that's them learning about honesty in action.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
Mm-hmm.
the guide argues that consistency, even in our flaws, is so much more powerful than trying to appear perfect.
Oh, for sure. It's that whole do what I say, not as I do, which backfires every time.
Exactly. So it's less about, sitting them down for a lecture on honesty and more about saying, okay, I messed up. I used salt instead of sugar when I was baking these cookies.
Oh, no.
But guess what? We're going to fix it together.
Okay, so turning those kitchen disasters into
Exactly.
a teachable moment.
They see that everybody makes mistakes.
Right.
And more importantly, they see how we take responsibility for them.
So a ruined batch of cookies can actually be a good thing.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the guide gives a ton of examples.
Right. Right.
It could be as simple as, a younger child helping sort of recycling.
Yeah.
And they learn about caring for the environment.
Right.
Or an older child gets to choose a charity to donate to.
I love that.
Exactly.
Making it tangible
Exactly.
in their world.
And as they get older, these small acts of responsibility actually lay the groundwork
Right.
for bigger conversations about, ethical behavior,
Mm-hmm.
and all of that. And, as they grow, that's where all those external influences come in.
Right.
Their friends, the music they listen to, video games,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
the guide definitely does not shy away from.
Right.
How tricky that can be.
Yeah, it's like we can lay this foundation at home.
Right.
And then they walk out the door and they're just hit with all these mixed messages.
Exactly.
So how do we even begin to sort of equip them for that?
Well, I think what the guide really emphasizes is it's less about us, controlling their every move.
Right.
And more about giving them the tools to think critically for themselves.
Right.
So, like, let's take music, for example. I'm sure you can remember, being a kid.
Oh, yeah.
And, like, totally engrossed in a song.
Absolutely.
And those lyrics just, like, spoke to your soul.
Oh, 100%. It felt so personal and so powerful and way more powerful than anything probably my parents were saying at the time.
Exactly. And the guide brings up a good point,
Yeah.
which is that, kids, they can easily absorb messages about relationships, about self-image, even about violence,
Right.
without even really, like, processing it.
Wow.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, so it's not about like banning certain artists or anything, but it's being more aware of
Right.
what they're listening to.
It could be as simple as, like, you have music on in the background, you're cooking dinner together,
Right.
and you just say, oh, what do you like about this song? Or what do you think this artist is trying to say?
Right, just turning it into a conversation instead of like, this is bad, you can't listen to this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The guide even talks about, like, creating family playlists,
Oh, I love that.
where you have some of your favorites, they have some of theirs.
Yeah, yeah.
It becomes this shared experience,
Totally.
a way to, like, bridge generations through music.
It's about connecting, not just controlling.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that connection, like, it's so crucial as
Right.
they're navigating, like, tricky social situations with their friends.
Right, right.
Because, yeah, the guy brings up a good point that, a lot of times peer pressure, it really preys on kids' desire to fit in,
Yeah.
even if it means compromising their values.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I remember so many times, it was like I had to choose between doing what I thought was right and being liked, and it was agonizing.
Yeah, and at that age, their brains are still developing, like the impulse control centers.
Oh, yeah, they're not all there. Right.
Right. So it's not so much that they're like trying to be bad or anything. It's just they need our guidance to make those good choices.
And this is where I think the guide was talking about, like, knowing your kids' friends.
Yes.
Really being aware of...
And not just knowing who they are,
Right.
but like observing the dynamics.
Right. Like, who are the influencers in the group?
Yes. Are they, encouraging like kindness?
Yeah.
Or are they encouraging, risky behavior?
So it's not about, like, forbidding your kids from being friends with certain people.
Right.
But it's about being present, observing, and being aware.
You got it. Like even something as simple as like, hosting movie nights at your house or, volunteering together as a family.
Right.
All those things give you little windows into their world without being like intrusive.
Right. And it opens the door for those conversations later.
Exactly.
Where you can be like, hey, I noticed this.
Sometimes just knowing that a parent is paying attention is enough
Totally.
to empower a kid to make a different choice.
Okay, so we talked about music, we talked about friends, but the elephant in the room, for a lot of parents, is video games.
Totally.
And the guide didn't hold back on sort of, their potential negative impact.
It did not, and for good reason.
Yeah.
While obviously not all video games are created equal,
Right.
I think the guide highlighted how excessive exposure to violence,
Right.
even in a fantasy setting, can really desensitize kids.
Yeah, which is tough. I mean, for a lot of parents, video games are a lifesaver on a busy day.
I hear you. But, the guide kind of said, think about it like their diet.
Okay.
Would you let them eat candy for every meal?
No, absolutely not. That's a great analogy.
Right.
So it's about kind of balance and setting those limits, just like we do with sugar.
Exactly. And choosing age-appropriate games.
Right.
Games that promote problem-solving or creativity.
Yeah. Right. And maybe even some social skills if they're playing with their friends or something like that.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right.
But how do you actually, like, enforce those limits,
Right.
without having these constant power struggles?
Right. Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
But the guide had a good point, which is to involve the kids in the process early on.
Okay.
Like, let them help choose the games.
Oh, that's good.
Let them, even have a say in, like, setting the time limits.
So it's less about, like, you're banned from all technology. It's,
Right.
hey, let's find something that we all enjoy or,
Exactly. And it gives them a sense of agency, too.
Right.
It's not just you, like, laying down the law.
Right.
And, kids, when they're involved in creating the rules, they're much more likely to actually respect them.
That makes a lot of sense. The guide also talked about, like, the importance of positive reinforcement. How do you suggest parents kind of apply that, especially as kids get older, into those teenage years, where it all just seems like a little babyish?
Yeah, well, I think it's about kind of like shifting gears a little bit,
Okay.
So instead of praising like, good grades,
Right.
maybe you're acknowledging their effort on a particularly tough project.
Okay.
Or instead of, like a toy for helping with chores,
Right.
maybe it's like they get to choose the movie for family movie night,
Oh, that's a good one.
things like that.
Yeah, just finding those little ways to show them that you notice and that you appreciate
Yes,
their contributions.
precisely. And, the guide is really big on emphasizing like non-material rewards as well.
Okay.
So, maybe it's letting them stay up a little bit later or have a friend over, things that, again, really reinforce that connection
Yeah.
and, give them that sense of autonomy.
Because ultimately, I mean, the goal here is not just to get them to do the right thing. It's to raise people who want to do the right thing.
Exactly. And, that's where I think this all kind of comes full circle.
Okay.
This guide really reminds us that teaching values, it's not about, molding them into mini versions of ourselves.
All right.
It's about equipping them to navigate the world with, their own internal compass.
Which can be terrifying.
It can be.
Right. Because you want to protect them from making all the mistakes. But
But that's how they learn.
that's how they learn, exactly.
Yeah.
And the guide even talks about that.
Right. Like we have to be more of a sounding board
Yes.
than a dictator.
Totally. So it's not about like swooping in and saying, here's how you fix it. It's, well, what do you think the right thing to do is?
Yes. What are the consequences going to be?
Right. Exactly.
You're helping them develop that critical thinking muscle,
Yeah.
which is they're going to need that to navigate all kinds of ethical dilemmas, long after they've, flown the coop.
100%. Any final words of wisdom from the guide for parents who might be feeling a little, like, overwhelmed with all of this?
I think the biggest takeaway is we don't have to be perfect.
Right.
None of us are. The most powerful thing we can do is just model those values ourselves, even when it's hard,
Yeah.
even when we mess up.
Because they see it even when we think they don't, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, just be kind, be
Yeah.
compassionate,
Be forgiving.
be forgiving of yourself and of them.
That's such a good point to end on, because it's a journey.
It is.
It's not about the destination.
It's not about perfection.
For all of you out there who are, diving deep into raising ethical humans, you're not alone.
We're all in this together.
We're all in this together, figuring it out one teachable moment at a time.
One day at a time.
Exactly. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.